This video is on so-called third wave feminism. So what is third wave feminism? It's a term coined by Rebecca Walker, a writer. The term arose around in the 1990s. Previously, the previous wave of feminism from the 1950s to about the late 1980s, early 1990s is often known as second wave feminism. The first wave was the wave of work, particularly by suffragettes and others, in the late 1800s through to the early mid 1900s. So third wave feminism was a feminism which was in part a reaction to and also an outgrowth of second wave feminism. It actually incorporates many of the ideas of second wave feminism, but also responds to some of the critiques around second wave feminism, such as the often made critiques that second wave feminism was anti-femininity, anti-sex and anti-sexuality. Third wave feminism tends to be more sex positive, less condemnatory towards sex workers and others who were often highly critiqued by second wave feminism around heterosexuality or commodification of oneself through sex work. In addition, many second wave feminists had rejected signs of compulsory femininity. Since coming out of the 1950s, 60s and 70s, there were certain forms of socially sanctioned femininity which was strongly expected of women. And part of feminism was to reject this straitjacket of patriarchal expectation of female appearance around makeup, painting fingers, wearing stockings, wearing skirts, etc. Then third wave feminism actually re-embraced some ideas around femininity, and there is some critique backwards and forwards between those who follow hard-aligned second wave feminism and people who more embrace the third wave and even fourth wave feminisms, looking at whether femininity is a capitulation to the patriarchy or whether it is a reclamation of the interests of women and a celebration of women by reclaiming that things that give some women joy. Third wave feminism generally incorporates greater intersectionality than some forms of second wave feminism, tends to be less essentialist about the nature of what it means to be a woman, and focuses on things that had often became possible to focus on because of the earlier interventions of second wave feminism. So first wave feminism found ways to allow women into the workplace. Second wave feminism built on that and worked very hard to get to remove bars to women being in work and to allow greater opportunity in the public sphere for women. And now third wave feminism came in to address the problems which existed once those barriers came down, including lack of equality of opportunity. So you could get hired by, for example, a law firm, but could you get to the top of the law firm? Those sorts of concerns, the hidden barriers and the glass ceiling were things that very much was something that concerned third wave feminism, including social and fiscal equality, freedom from gender-based violence, in particular violence, domestic violence and violence in the home, and sexual assault. There was very much an awareness of postmodern linguistics of gender, such that in the early 90s and late 80s, you'll see various types of media mocking feminists for wanting words such as chairperson or just chair instead of chairman. There was that awareness of the power of language to signify that there was a preference or a normative role for men that was not so available to women. And there was also a lot of pop culture analysis looking at how the media that we consume reinforced the patriarchy in our homes, in our heads and in our lives. And so this was starting to unpack a lot of things that became available to us to unpack because the initial barriers had been broken down by the first and second wave. The third wave of feminism included writers such as Baumgartner and Richards, who wrote Manifesta. And they took one of the lovely quotes from that article, that book, is it's not feminism's goal to control any woman's fertility, only to free each woman to control her own. Thus, to some degree, they're rather rejecting some of the ideas that some of the earlier feminists had around what was the ideal way to deal with women's position as those who gestate children. And this was saying women should be able to make that choice. Rebecca Walker, Ansel Dewar, Moraga, Elizabeth Wurtzel, Bitch in Praise of Difficult Women. Susan Faludi, who wrote Backlash, looking at the way that after the strides and changes under second wave feminism, that society had in some ways had a turn to a more conservative patriarchal outlook, and that she called that the backlash. And in some ways we're seeing that, for example, in the US, where Roe versus Wade actually said that the availability of abortion was constitutionally protected, and now so many places are trying to roll that back and limit it. Eve Ensler's The Vagina Monologues, which is a play, very famous, again also came out of the third wave. And just be aware, The Vagina Monologues has more recently also been trans supportive. Critiques of third wave feminism from more radical feminists often, or some of the other forms of feminism, is that sometimes third wave feminists are happy to adopt patriarchal expectations around performing femininity. The third wave feminists would say, no, I'm doing this for myself. The critical radical feminists, for example, would say, are you doing it for yourself, or are you doing it because you've internalized patriarchy and learned to take pleasure in certain performative femininities that patriarchy expects of you? And there's some tension between those two views. And I actually don't see a problem with performing certain types of femininity. Clearly, I do the dresses and things. But and while also, as many third wave feminists would say, yes, this was originally a patriarchally mandated thing to do, wear makeup or whatever. And I also enjoy it, and I also choose not to reject something that other women take pleasure in, and that therefore it is a thing that can be both something for women and something that in the past has been patriarchally mandated, or both. And that certain types of signifiers of femininity are something that anyone should be able to take pleasure in, whatever their gender. So they tend to complicate what had been very hardline yes-no kind of ideas from the second wave. There's also some critiques that, despite claiming intersectionality and often being aware of it, some third wave feminists may ignore concerns of non-white, non-cis or non-middle class women. So you might remember a few years ago the so-called slut walks, where a Canadian police officer had called some young women sluts for being out at night and wearing clothes that he didn't approve of, and said that if they were attacked, that would be their own fault. So all around the world, women marched, often in scanty outfits or topless, etc., to reclaim the idea that women should be able to be in public and that their clothing was not an excuse for assault. However, some non-white people, particularly black women in the US, were saying this use of the word slut and an attempt to reclaim it is something that is very fraught for women whose bodies, no matter what they wear, are seen as hypersexualized, and so and that they can't safely access the idea that a white woman could, that by taking off her top she should still be safe, when even with your top on you're not safe because your body is seen as hypersexualized. Similarly, some of the early uh, uh, rallies against Trump, the pussy hat rallies. You might remember people were wearing kind of cute knitted hats like cat ears in pink, which basically were playing on the use of the term pussy for vagina. And many trans women found that while they were happy to march against Trump and his horrible sexism and history of sexual harassment and assault, etc., the idea that to have or be a pussy was something that legitimized feminist uprising was something that was quite difficult for some trans women and some gender non-conforming folk. So, and many of the people who organised these rallies were not necessarily hostile to these concerns, but rather oblivious, while simultaneously saying we're intersectional, we care about Black people, we care about our trans friends, but here's this great idea. So they don't always, often through ignorance and through ignoring the voices of those who aren't white, middle-class, cis women, sometimes forget to hear what is a problem. So that's third wave feminism. We're now moving into a so-called fourth wave of feminism, and I've actually linked a video that explains it better than I can, I think, on this website. So that's third wave feminism.